of unexploded shells and other ammunition remain in battlefields, causing further injuries and fatalities to this day. Deep trauma led to the term lost generation in describing those who came of age during World War I.
Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1921. Deaths, 5 to 9 million. Cost, $35 billion US. Displaced, 2 million. Aftermath. Overall production fell to 20% of the pre-war production. Agriculture fell to 37% of normal production, contributing to the Russian famine of 1921.
World War II, 1939 to 1945. Deaths, up to 72 million, representing 3.1% of the 1939 world population, making it the deadliest war ever, with up to 11 million killed in the Holocaust. Displaced, up to 20 million. Cost, $4 trillion US. Aftermath. European and Soviet Union economies collapsed with much of their industrial infrastructure destroyed. Of the displaced people, nearly all were malnourished, with many who were ill or subsequently perished. With hundreds of thousands of women who were sexually assaulted, some 10,000 in Germany later died, mostly by suicide. Many post-war soldiers were afflicted with acute post-traumatic stress disorder, which was observed in veterans even decades later. Cities were annihilated by bombing. Radiation from the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear explosions instantly killed 140,000 people, up to 350,000 others succumbing eventually. Animals and plants also perished to high levels of radiation.
India-Pakistani wars. 4 main wars from 1947 to 1999, plus ongoing. Deaths, 28,270. Cost. Military costs to India and Pakistan, a combined $3 billion US. Lost tourism revenue of $3.6 billion US. Between 2004 and 2008, India and Pakistan lost potential trade income of at least $12 billion US, and counting. Unexploded munitions, leftover landmines and other explosives in the border regions of both countries cause hundreds of fatalities each year. Not included are emotional, psychological, physical and spiritual damage for people, children and future generations.
Arab-Israeli conflict, 1948 to present. Deaths, 74,000 military, 18,000 civilians. Displaced, 1.7 million of 4 million Palestinians are refugees. Costs, the U.S. government pays $3 billion US annually to aid Israel's military, while the total cost of Arab-Israeli conflict to U.S. taxpayers since World War II is $3 trillion US in 2002 dollars, $114 billion US of which was direct aid to Israel. And counting. Aftermath. Economic costs. Reduced national income of $12 trillion US for Israel and the Arab nations, with up to trillions of dollars in lost economic opportunities due to conflict. Mental health. 80% of Palestinian children suffer from behavioral and sleep problems, as well as increasing levels of violence and reduced hope in the future. Over 90% of Israelis, meanwhile, report that they live with a feeling of insecurity.
Korean War, 1950 to 1953 armistice. Deaths, 4 million. Cost, $678 billion US for 1951 to 1953, $1 billion US for 1951 to 2000, and counting. Aftermath. The war technically is still not over. In the decades following the ceasefire armistice, hundreds more have been killed in incidents near the inter-Korean border, and millions of families were permanently separated. Soldiers sent there to fight suffered high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, according to one study of Australian veterans.
Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. Deaths, 1.5 million military, up to 4 million civilians. Injuries, over 600,000 northern, 1.5 million southern. Costs, USA spent $111 billion US, or $686 billion US in 2008 dollars. Not included are emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual damage for people, children, and future generations. Aftermath. Displaced, over 3 million fled au lac or Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, mostly by boat, seeking refuge in other countries from the violence. Environment. The spread of herbicides such as Agent Orange by U.S. troops to defoliate the countryside left behind a poisoned food chain and an estimated 4 million affected by disease, with children who are still being born missing limbs and with other disabilities. In the U.S., children born to veterans exposed to Agent Orange also have a higher incidence of diseases including prostate cancer, diabetes, and nerve disorders. Economic costs. Indirect and direct costs such as benefits for veterans and slower U.S. economic growth equals around $900 billion US. Mental health. 30% of U.S. soldiers experienced mental disorders and substance abuse following the war.
Colombian armed conflict, 1964 to present. Deaths, up to 200,000. Cost, $2.67 billion US annually by Colombian government. and counting.
Cambodian War, 1970 to 1979. Deaths, 4 million, 56% of 1970 population. Refugees, 350,000. Aftermath, a high percentage of those who survived had their lives destroyed, suffering from severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, with children who had witnessed violence joining gangs as teens and even murdering others. 40,000 amputees due to landmines and unexploded munitions, one of the highest rates in the world. 4 to 6 million landmines and other munitions still contaminate around 20% of villages, reducing incomes due to lack of access to water, fields and forests. Families with one or more people disabled by explosives are much more likely to live in poverty.
Timor-Leste, or East Timor. Occupation, 1975 to 1999. Deaths, 200,000 from military violence, starvation, and disease. Refugees, 300,000, almost half of the population, were forced into camps in West Timor. By 1999, 70% of infrastructure was destroyed, including homes, irrigation, water supply systems, schools, and electricity grid. Aftermath. The economy continues to be affected, with 53% of the population living on less than $1.25 per day. The country ranks 158th out of 170 in the Human Development Index, indicating low achievement in life expectancy, education, and standard of living.
Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. Deaths and injuries, up to 1 million Iranians, 300,000 Iraqis. Costs, initial cost of $1.2 trillion or $600 billion each.
Not included are emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual damage for people, children, and future generations.
Aftermath. Economic costs. Slowdown in economic growth for both countries, with reduced funds leading collapses in key areas such as scientific and technological productivity. Unexploded munitions. With around 20 million landmines still in the ground, Iraq is considered one of the most mine-contaminated countries in the world.